Welcome to Keeping Up with Data. Keeping Up with Data is the podcast that keeps data enthusiasts up to speed with what is happening in the data world. We bring in the leading minds from the data industry to talk all things career, news, embarrassing stories, failures and successes.
So something really important for us here at Precision Sourcing is mental health. It's something we've been focused on a lot over the last year or so, and we're lucky enough to have partnered with the Black Dog Institute. And we're going to be doing a lot of events with them this year. A lot of our events, money will be going towards them. And they're out there aiming to create a mentally healthier world for everyone. So if you wish to support the cause, please donate via the link in the bio on this podcast, and you'll be seeing a lot more information about Black Dog over the next year.
So welcome once again to the Keeping Up with Data podcast with myself, Joel Robinson, and my colleague,
James Roth.
And we're here today joined by Ben McNeil. Ben, as always, with our guests, we are not going to introduce you for you. If you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. So my name is Ben McNeil. I guess I'm 20 years in climate science as a data sort of climate scientist. And the last few years, I've I've co-founded a startup called Emmi, and that's a platform, a data-driven platform that essentially empowers the world, into the financial world, to go towards net zero emissions in carbon. So we're focused on the climate problem, but really from a data angle.
Brilliant. No, I'm really excited about today. This was not to discount any of the other podcasts that we're doing, but this is an interesting topic that we haven't touched upon yet on the podcast.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so
it's
much
great
for coming on.
Yeah,
Excited.
Great.
So, as always, we'll go through Emily on the streets. We'll hit the best data joke that you've got as well. We'll find out who you would take with you into a zombie apocalypse, the important questions. But we'll get to those further down the line, so you don't have to worry about them right now. But the first question, you've mentioned there, climate scientist for 19 years. I mean, tell the people, how do you become a climate scientist and how do you start in that?
Yeah, that's a bit. That's good. I mean, I think actually it's funny because like with most sort of areas in careers, there's a lot of accidental, you fall into certain places. But I grew up in Queensland on the coast and I love the ocean. So I was surfing all the time as a teenager and just was really connected with nature and particularly the oceans. And this is way back in time. So when I was a teenager in the late 80s. So then I would, you saw news events, and at that time, environmental, the awareness of the environment was just sort of taking off. But then there was a couple of big events that happened that really shaped my passion. And you probably don't remember, but there was this big oil spill in Alaska in, I think, 1989 called the Exxon Valdez. And it just, a drunk captain just he was taking thousands of tons of crude and really decimated this community, this really pristine community, both, this fishing town. And I remember seeing the images when I was young and thinking that's just like, we have everything we do has sort of some sort of consequence. But that was just such an impactful moment for me as a young kid. That how do we try and stop that? Like, how do we try and create better ways to solve those problems before they come? So that those types of events as a teenager, as you probably guys know too, they sort of shape you, and it led me down the path of doing more particularly on the ocean. So I did an engineering degree, environmental engineering, and then beyond that, fortunately got this summer scholarship to go down to work with the CSIRO. There's a really huge marine division down there in Hobart, actually in Tassie. And for Australia, the marine and climate hub is really Tasmania. I don't know if everyone is aware of that, but because we have a link with Antarctica, so there's this huge program down there for marine scientists, atmospheric scientists. And so I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship. I did that for 4 months, and that wasn't necessarily data in the sense of what we think about it today. It was collecting samples on a ship, and then going to analyze what's happening in the real world. So I loved it, and that was the start, really. And so from there, I did a PhD down there, and then from that, again, not necessarily big data. It was more going collecting and then analyzing the results. Then the satellites moved, like a lot in the ocean world, for example, in the climate world, a lot of satellites came online. A lot of more autonomous instruments started to really be deployed, and that allowed, obviously, there was just a ton of data, and at the same time, beyond that, there was models. So we started modeling in high resolution. So the demand for data, and this is what the late 90s, the demand for to analyze that and work out what the real world's doing, it was huge. And so from that, I guess I went to the US, did a postdoc over there, then sort of came back, and for a long time I was at the University of New South Wales. I'm an adjunct still there now, but really focused on a number of different projects, but some big data projects in the ocean, trying to predict carbon dioxide levels and how that works, all the way through to small scale, going up to the Great Barrier Reef and working out, if ocean acidification is a big challenge. So there was sort of a variety of different projects I worked on in academia, and climate science overall was there too. So I was part of a big climate review as part of in 2009 when Obama was elected. There was a big climate meeting in Copenhagen, and I was part of a small group, sort of 20 leading climate scientists around the world, to submit a review on this, on what the latest was at the time. So I was sort of buried in the details of my day-to-day projects with my students and postdocs, and then all the way up to the sort of bigger, sort of more, I guess you'd call, communications level, where it's trying to engage around the data to policymakers, which
that's brilliant.
is also another challenge.
Yeah, I was going to say.
So that's I guess that's the journey. And then I flipped in the last few years. So look, I want to make bigger impact in the real world, and so I came from academia, and now I'm with Emmi, and we're engaging real people.
And I'm excited to talk about Emmi. We'll definitely get into some detail on that. But that journey that you've described there, there's so many points that I think we want to pick on today.
Sure.
Because
it's
not a normal journey. I mean, first of all, James, I know for someone like yourself to know what you wanted to be so early in life is a great start into something which helped you get into it early, because most people we speak to by the time they're 24, 35 still don't really know what they want to be, right?
I think most people, I think most people don't. I was really fortunate that I did, but I think there's nothing wrong with that. It's being curious and open, though, along the way is sort of the most important factor. And because with so many amazing things going on in the world, it's there's something will really drive you to do something. It's rare that doesn't happen at some point eventually, even when you're 50.
Yeah. 100%. So I know you touched on something there. I mean, let's talk about that first before we go back in time. In the sense you mentioned about influencing policymakers. You're one of 20 leading climate scientists doing, climate conferences when Obama's getting elected. And I know, James, the people that you speak to in the data world, the biggest frustration they ever have is, we know what the data says, we know what the insight is, but can't get people convinced.
You go about actually like getting them to see what you're trying to show them, getting them on board about like, this is what you've kind of asked us, this is what you need to do, this is what you need to change. How do you get them on that journey, so to speak?
And I'm guessing for you, and we're not going to get too deep into politics hopefully today, but it's the decision making is so driven by policy and party lines, and this is what our party thinks, the left wing or right wing. So what's that been like for you as someone who, I'm guessing, has seen some really obvious things that need to change or need to happen, and not seeing it?
I think it's a big question, and I think it's not just data. I mean, science is built around data. I mean, the scientific enterprise and how we actually learn about the world is built around the core measurement and how you interpret that and work it out, but and theorize on it. But the thing is that, and what I realized, it doesn't speak for itself. You know, it's, you may know what it means, but the world doesn't. And the story, the narrative of how you share that is just as probably even more powerful or more important than the data itself. And that could be just sharing it in a different way. Like, I spend a lot of time on charts and what's the best way to present data? What's the best way to essentially tell a story?
Yeah.
Because if the human, we are compelled towards narratives and stories and sort of, and that's how we think. You know, we don't think in discrete binary fashion. We think in narratives.
Yeah.
So we have to translate that. And I think if you look at journalism as an example, I think that's a really great area where you see data journalism is now taking over in terms of the storytelling. Some of the articles now that are really data driven is just really awesome. And I think generally speaking, whether you're working for your own data team in a company, any company, it's that type of narrative that you actually need to build. So I would like data scientists, and in my team, I encourage them to really build out not just the best quantitative, capacity and skills, but also how you communicate that, how you actually get that. How would you write that and engage that to someone who doesn't know, to your grandmother? Like, how would you know that? How would you try and do that?
Exactly.
And that's hugely important. From an impact perspective. So I learned that I learned that. I mean, facts don't speak for themselves. I've realized that, and you need to. I mean, look at the debate. Look at what's happening now in the media. I mean, it's extremes now. It's all just these snapshot, cherry picking of data, all sorts of stuff that's going on from COVID to climate to whatever.
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
Whilst data's entered the world, the mainstream, you've now got the general public, which we'll get to on Emily on the Streets, having snippets of this, what they believe to be how you should use data, or snippets of data, and they're not data savvy people, but they go, well, I've got this one piece of data, and that's what my whole life narrative is now attached to, and it can cause more problems in some senses in that case. And have you ever been in a presentation, I'm guessing, where you've just been up against something so belligerent, where even though your story was on point, data was on point, they still went, nah, just we.
No, that's the world we live in now. That's the world. That's like, for example, when you just think of the hospitalisation and deaths caused by COVID now in Australia, it's like I think it's the majority of those in hospital have been vaccinated. You go, oh, what? Does that mean this is just a massive conspiracy? Well, no, because 95% of the population
exactly.
So it's and the risk, and if you delve in the data, obviously there's still a 5 to 15 times more likelihood that you'll go to hospital when you're not vaccinated. So you can it's been weaponized now, misinformation and data has now. The thing for me, I've been in that space for a long time. Way before Twitter and Facebook, you just had mainstream media. You had people talking about climate change as this massive conspiracy, and the science is still there's massive debate, and you can't really. It's hard to argue against a snippet. How do you rationalize a debate over in sound bites? You sort of can't. It's very difficult to do that. So to your point, you can't really take on those who are not open. So I don't engage those who aren't sort of open. I change my viewpoint based on what the evidence at hand. I don't really care. I mean, I'd love someone tomorrow to come and win the Nobel Prize and say, actually, the science is bullshit. You forgot about this thing. You forgot about this effect. That'd be awesome.
Exactly, right.
So that's the whole process. So I think we have to just take that into account, that there's I don't know what the proportion is, 5%, 1% of the extremes who are never going to listen to whatever data or whatever truth you give them.
Exactly, and they're the loud minority, right? And all we see in the newspapers and whatever news article you're reading is those who are shouting the loudest, but the 90% that are generally in the middle that just get on with life in a sense, rather than, but all we hear is, the whole world is divided and one's on this side and one's on that side. So, I can imagine
exactly.
had some interesting conversations over the years. It's something that I find quite frustrating. And the podcast we've just released today, actually, with a gentleman called Dean who works for Endeavour Energy, the key theme in that podcast was pushing ego to the side. Working with data, it doesn't matter if you've spent 10 years saying one thing. As soon as that evidence that is irrefutable comes up, you have to be able to push your ego to the side and say, do you know what? It's not about me and making myself feel better. It's the fact that we have to change our opinion, which is very hard for some people to do.
And again, going back to your point before about the narrative, that can be changed. I guess it's data can always enlighten new sort of caves, and and I think Keynes Rosling was the key, right? I mean, if you look at what he did, I don't know if you know him, but he's this data scientist he's now passed though, but he was all around showing the optimistic side. It was truthful in the sense that the optimistic side of what human progress was happening over the last 20 years, because you can take it and go, actually, if you look at all these trends going towards, I don't know, biodiversity and overfishing or plastics in the ocean or what have you, you can sort of, that's cherry picking too, right? You could just actually take that in and just go, oh my God, it's a catastrophe. But in reality, you need to look at a broader picture as well. And if you look at, I don't know, prosperity and poverty, the opposite numbers, if you look at crime, for example, as a function of, in the developed world I'm talking about, it's the lowest in the 30 years. And then you have these snippets of like massive riots in the US or what have you is going on. You would think it's chaos, but it's actually, you sort of take a bigger picture and you look at from someone who creates that narrative around, actually, here's the broader picture and the data. It's really powerful. It's really important to not be closed-minded.
Yeah, my rabbit hole moment came around 24, 25, and I just had to pull myself out of it, because you just can get depressed if you take all the negative pieces of what's going on in the world, and you have to get yourself out of it. Well, look, let's lighten the mood up slightly, I guess, because I honestly go on a million topics about this, but I guess it's quite poignant right now. If your job, I'm asking you as well, James, so you can think about what Ben's answering. If your job was made into a TV show, who would play you, and what TV show or maybe movie would it be like? And the only reason I'm saying is you could legitimately say Leonardo DiCaprio, I guess, after the recent movie that came out.
Oh my God, I have no idea. I don't know. It's like I like the sort of, I'm right now into the dark dramas on Netflix, like Ozarks. I don't know that. So I'm massively into that Jason Bateman right now. So maybe him.
Good shout. And have you got any shows or movies that your life would be based on?
My life would be based on. So, like, you mean a movie that's like oh gosh, no idea. I can't think of one. I don't like talking about myself. Maybe that's what the deal is. I don't know.
Well, who would you in a movie, James?
Oh, I don't know. I was thinking about who would do us as a job, and I was trying to think who would match like the mindset.
Who would that be then?
Well, there's a show on Netflix I love called Queen of the South, and the main character, Teresa, and I forget the actual actress name, but she's like obviously it's a very different setting, but she's a big problem solver.
Right, okay.
And I think she adapts quite well, which I think you need in this sort of industry. Who would play me in a movie? I'm not good with, because I don't relate to a lot of movie people, but I really like Johnny Depp, so I'd always just choose him. If he could be.
What about Tom Hiddleston? Loki in the Marvel movies.
Maybe.
He's quite tall and similar, but anyway, we're getting it's all good. It's all good. All right, so back to your I guess career, shall we say, Ben?
Yeah.
You've now moved from academia into a startup. So let's pick on that firstly, because there's so many people who do struggle to make that change from academia into the commercial world. So have you always had a bit of a toe in the commercial world, or has it been a very big transition for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it's not usual to leave a tenured position and sort of a job for life and go into something that's very risky. So I think I've always been driven by impact around what I do, and so I don't really care for titles or, you know, earning squillions or what have you. It's more around impact. And so I think I've always had that bent, and the moment where I sort of think I'm becoming stale in sort of the impact I'm creating, then I'll move. I'll move to whatever next venture project idea it is, I think. So I think it was in that regard, academia is very non-commercial. It's all research oriented, but you know, I've always had people around me that are very commercial and very savvy, and you know, so I think my friends, my family, and some of the colleagues who I used to be in touch with would keep me in touch that way of like what's going on. So I think that was probably the impetus. So it actually, yes, it's a huge change, and it's a big risk, and no one usually does it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely suited for me in terms of my outlook on life and career.
And is there any advice that you could give people taking that? I mean, as you said, leaving a tenured position is not just leaving. Maybe you've done your PhD and you're thinking of doing another one. You've really kind of put yourself out there. Any advice for people as to the differences between the two worlds?
Yeah, I actually think there's a big difference between the two worlds. The research is not very collaborative. Like I've found industry and where I'm now is we're super collaborative, as in day to day solving problems. In research, you're sort of left to your own devices in many regards. You've got your team, but each team member, like students will be working on their own problem. It's not a day to day cadence. So yes, it's, you know, weekly or something. You get, you know, you review something, but it's not as collaborative, I found, in research, and that's because that's not rewarded, actually. So there's a lot of incentives that are problematic in research that lead to this. But that's where I think the bigger one lies is not necessarily the challenges are, you know, I mean, I guess the challenges are generally in research are longer term too. You don't have a short term time frame to turn things around. So you can I think from research side, there's more complex problems. So there's big differences, but you know, I think there's pros and cons in both, really.
Yeah, I can imagine. All right. Well, before we, as I say, get into the Emmi side of things, let's go and find out what people on the streets do know about data, which is always one of my favorite parts of the show. So what we'll do is, here we go. So the question this week is, what do data engineers do? So, you know, for someone like yourself and us, maybe quite an easy question, but we usually have 5 or 6 people who've answered the same question. So how many people do you think know what data engineers do? Do you reckon?
Like 5%.
5%.
Nothing.
Wow. Okay, so
I don't think anyone.
lucky if we
They
get
just go
50%.
what they would. I don't know what they'd say.
Okay.
I don't know what they'd say.
James, what do you reckon the
I
general
was going to be
public?
optimistic and say like 2 out of 6.
2 out of 6? Okay, so still pretty low. All right, well let's find out and see what the people said.
What does a data engineer do?
They don't actually know. They do they work with they work with the data to then create reports and help people to understand what the data actually means.
They build pipelines.
Managing data.
They pull data and they put it into a system. The data engineer engineers the data that is required by businesses to make decisions.
All right, let's get back to it.
Well,
first things first, the gentleman at the end who said data engineers engineer data can't, because he just used the words to describe what they do. So The gentleman at the beginning reports an insight. I won't give him that either.
No.
The pipeline one was good.
Yeah, that's someone who knows that there's no way that's a general public.
You'd think that, well, maybe they're in the. We did catch a couple of people who were kind of, one person who we spoke to who wasn't on that knew everything. We're like, well, what do you do? And they were like, oh, I'm a data analyst. We're like, oh, okay, well, there you go. Obviously, they are out there on the street sometimes. There's another part of me that thinks if you take the words data engineer, what do engineers do? They build things. So maybe, but yeah, you'd think so. That was one.
Yeah.
And there was one other who said they get data and put it into systems. We probably wouldn't. Would we give him that?
Yeah, I guess it's something that, it's getting there. I guess there's a structuralized. Engineers build the framework to make the data flow. I guess there's something towards that. I'm sort of surprised that they actually did a reasonable job there.
Yeah, not bad. I'd give them 1.5 out of 5 there, I would say, overall, which is pretty good. We asked them quite a lot of questions, and I think that might have been one of the last questions. So they had at that point really got to thinking about the data world. So maybe it caught them in that right zone.
Yeah, jog the mind a bit. And
I see.
This is what the theme is.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows anyway? Yeah. Well, anyway, that was pretty good. I'm impressed with the general public. All right, so data jokes. My favourite part of the show, because I don't ever do one. So I get to sit here and laugh at how bad everyone else's data jokes are. James, would you like to go first or second?
No, I'll let Ben go first.
Okay, Ben.
Well, I don't have data jokes. The only one I know of that's vaguely a joke is the what would you follow someone into a burning building and the AI says yes, I would.
It reminds me of that. Do you remember? I don't know if you watched The American Office when Michael drives into the lake because the sat nav told him to.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Well, that was Apple Maps, right? That was Apple Maps in the early days.
Yeah, Apple Maps, exactly right. James, it's your moment.
What does a baby computer call its father? Data, data.
That's
bad.
Good delivery though. So. Good. All right. So the last political question before we get into exactly what Emmi does, one of my favourite questions. If you had an audience with Scott Morrison, what data would you show him?
I would show him I would show him the data that around the world where economic prosperity is matched with reduction in emissions. So it's actually so there's a whole idea that if you do something well for the economy, it's bad for the environment. That's just a complete fallacy. Right? So I would show him that because I think he's still in that old world of thinking.
Do you think he'd listen?
Probably not.
So we won't do any Scott Morrison bashing on this week's show anyway.
Yes, that's okay.
All right, well that's a great segue then into Emmi. So obviously we've worked with you a little bit, Ben. So we have a vague idea, I hope, of what you do. But my understanding is that you're trying to create a net zero world, and you're engaging with investors, and in the investment world, which maybe most people wouldn't ever think of as an area that would be too worried about net zero. I guess that's a good sign that there's a changing sentiment in people who do invest. They are more careful with their money, which is great. But obviously, over to you to exactly what Emmi is and
sure. Well, so I think just to set things up, I think everyone has probably learnt that over particularly the last couple of years, there's been this massive push towards companies and countries going towards net zero, trying to get to a target of net zero by 2050. And that's great because that's what the science is telling us in terms of limiting warming, hopefully giving us a chance to limit warming by 1.5 degrees, which avoids the worst sort of the consequences of climate change. But to do that, the question is what next? How does the whole economic infrastructure that the world's in, how do you price that? How do you try and propagate through, go, okay, this company, given that we have this constraint of going towards net zero, what is this company, how are they positioned versus this company? Right now, there's no way to do that. There's no way to quantify the framework to which you can actually even just understand how each company, each country, each portfolio as an investor, how you quantify that. So we set out about to try and fix that, to essentially create the data infrastructure that allows anyone to really understand and quantify the risks and the opportunities in the net zero world, to allow them to then deploy their capital, their investments, their resources towards the opportunities and the solutions. So it's really we combine carbon data. So we have an emissions project where we're using the buzzwords that I hate, that I hope you guys talk about. We're using predictive skill to try and come up with corporate emissions when they have never, even the company themselves don't know what they are. So essentially we can actually predict their emissions using just their finances, for example.
Wow.
That's one project that's really important for us, because it builds, that's the data infrastructure that allows us to then feed financial data as well as the climate science data. So the top down, what are the budgets that we need? Feed that into essentially our algorithm, our platform, and our infrastructure, to then allow a playground, essentially allow the world to sort of look at all companies on an even basis. So how does this company perform versus that company? And then you aggregate up to portfolios. So let's say our current clients are mostly investors, super funds. They're wanting their capital to be towards net zero. How do they do that? So we essentially build the tools to allow them to actually understand that, and then act and then action that. So how do they deploy their capital towards this low carbon, net zero world? So essentially that's what we're trying to do. And the reason we do that is, and I've sort of switched into this space, is that if the financial ecosystem is, if that is empowered and changes towards net zero, and there's structure to do that, that will be that'll have the biggest impact on climate change, without doubt. I mean, yes, we talk about Elon Musk, but honestly, that's just a very small fraction of how big this challenge is. But if you deploy the world's capital towards net zero, you've solved pretty much the equation.
Yeah.
So that's where that's what we're building, essentially, allow that to happen and empower that.
Money talks, basically, is what we're discussing here.
Yeah, as an example, I'll give you one key example. Like, this isn't just governments. Well, no, it's actually not. It's the government sort of set the waffling frameworks. They're like, oh yeah, we're going to do this, that. But now the investment community is really taking, or the finance community is really taking shape. So, as an example, Larry Fink, who, I don't know if you guys know who that is, but he's the CEO of BlackRock, and BlackRock are they're in New York. They essentially manage, I don't know, $8 trillion worth of investments and money. So people come to them, pension funds, what have you, and they manage the money. Well, the last 2 years, he said essentially Larry Fink said if climate change can essentially cause the next financial crisis, there's 50 trillion or something at risk. If you don't, as a company, have a net zero pathway that's credible, we are pretty much not going to invest in you, and you will go bankrupt. This is like not tomorrow, but this is over a transition. So that's not governments talking. That's not like, which is all fluff, politicians. This is like the heart and core of the finance, the economic ecosystem that we have, that is shaping this. So it's really great that's taken shape, and most others are really eager to essentially not only understand what's happening, but also because there's opportunities here. It's not about just saying, oh, it's all a cost. There's actually huge opportunities in innovation and areas where we know there's going to be big solutions. So, and I don't care if they're not doing it ethically. I don't care if it's morally, but we need capitalism to be driven towards the problem. And right now, there's no way to do that very effectively. And so we want to try and do that.
So when you're talking about impact, I mean, we're talking about real world global impact here. This isn't just, a small
so we're global. So we cover, all the 42,000 equities across the world. We have, clients and investors that from mostly. I mean, there's London, and right now we're still startup stage, so we've still got seed funding. So we're a couple of years old in terms of the traction. But yeah, it's global in nature. We're all about the impact. If we have impact where we need to be, it has to be global. So for sure.
And so your customer base is the large investment funds, the hedge funds. I mean, maybe large individual investors as well. Would this impact small scale investors as well who are able to access this data, or?
Yeah, so at this stage we're focused on the institutional investors. So the super funds. So where the 9% or 12%, whatever it is that you actually are putting towards your super fund. Those funds will be, some of those we'll be working with in terms of their super. So it's mostly the super funds and also asset managers. They're the ones who are a bit, they're the funds themselves. They run their own fund, as an example. They're the ones we are working with as well.
Brilliant.
And a lot of those, and a lot of those are really on the journey. Like some of them are really just starting this journey. Like, what do we do with net zero? Like, how do we allocate where our capital goes?
Yeah, exactly. I know.
And others are really sophisticated. So that's where in London it's more sophisticated than where we are, but in the US it's sort of behind. It's quite behind. So yeah, that's where it's exciting because it's a new market in the sense that we have to educate a lot. It's not just about showing people the quant stuff. It's more around education, because they're like, what do you mean that, carbon intensity, and like, how do I measure carbon performance across my portfolio? What does that mean? Like, these are all sort of very new-ish concepts, but they're part of the ether going forward. So it's really exciting to actually, work around data and a cutting edge problem, but also communicating that and helping the I guess the industry be educated and move along the journey as we all move towards net zero.
So one of the key questions I had about that today was, I'm lucky enough at the stage of my life where my wife and I are starting to think where our money is, and my wife's very conscious of sustainability and climate change, and has said, I only want our money invested in places that I deem as, ethical in my eyes. How does, take someone like James or me, people on the street, how do we approach our super fund and say, hey, we want to be invested in, net zero? Are we able to say, hey, go and talk to this company, you should be onto them? Like, how do we as individuals help to impact this moving forward?
Yeah, that's exactly your point. That it's like same thing with companies. Like, so we do have the capacity to make the impact we at least try to make the impact that we can for companies. So if a company's doing something, you can engage them and say, look, what's your plan here for your super funds? Like, but you are investing, like directly investing your money. Well, some may not know, but you are into these funds. And Australia has one of the highest, I think fourth highest super fund industry in the world. It's huge because of the the long legacy and the guarantee. So you can actually ask them, how can I get what are your strategies, and what's your you have certain different selections and portfolios. How are they aligned with the net zero world? Can you check with Emmi? You can if you want to. I mean, I'm happy for you guys too, and who's out there. And we can engage with them and say, look, here's where you're at. They may not know. Some of them, the biggest super funds that we're working with, Aware Super, they're very sophisticated around this. They're really up there in terms of global leaders. They're up there. But there's other ones who are really just starting. So I think you can really, yes, it takes a bit of time for you to learn. And it's not a easy, here's a ranking of all the super funds. down the road, I hope we can get there. We can actually do that.
I was going to be my question.
So that would be something down the road we could probably do.
Yeah.
But at this stage, we do need the data. Like, what is the portfolios? Like, so we don't have all the portfolios there anyway. So, and I think that's where data can actually be really powerful to unlock a lot of the I guess accelerate the movement towards consumer demand, because as you say, like, they're businesses too. If consumers are moving towards this space, then they will also follow. So it's sort of like it's a positive feedback there.
But it's great that you've named one company there, because that is the thing, right? Is if the consumers move and enough people are saying, hey, we're aware of this, we want this, then the businesses will look at their model and they'll want to be a leader in that space. And then from there, the others get dragged along. And I'm guessing the same in the investment space, as certain hedge funds and investment management funds say, hey, we're doing this, and they drive business towards them. Because of that, everything comes, as a trail behind it.
But there's so much fluff out there, though, isn't there? Like, so that's the thing. Every company is trying to push their own agenda, and you go, what's truth? Like, what's actually the truth here? Like, what are you? So that's where data comes in. You sort of can benchmark that, and I'm hoping we can publish things in the future where you or anyone can see, where the actual data lies.
Exactly. So for now,
lies in terms of where it sits, not lies.
Yeah, exactly. So now what we can
data
do
can't lie.
No,
data can't lie.
It can, yeah. So we can do as individuals right now is we can get in touch with our super fans and we say, hey, this is something I'm concerned about. This is something that I'm interested in. Can you please let me know how my portfolio is diversified? And if it's not in a certain area that you're happy with, then you I guess you talk with your feet and either move to a new super fund, or your super fund turns around and says, yeah, we're looking into that and we're on the right path, basically. That's what we can do as individuals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Really,
exactly.
Really interesting topic, that. So, and so how's it going just generally as a business? You guys, you said you had seed funding round, you're growing, it's going well so far?
Yeah, so we've got I can't remember the head count we have now, but yeah, the seed funding was good. We raised that last August. From the product side, we're really going very, it's amazing what we're sort of being able to do, because when you have a great team, it's and a collaborative team, there's just a lot you can achieve, obviously, and that's obvious, but it's great that we're all impact focused but skilled at what we do. So it's really great to see the trajectory, and so this year will be a very sort of big year. We're probably expanding quite even more, I would say. There might be some more. I mean, obviously we are growing our revenue. The sales is going. It's a long sales cycle for us, but once you do have a sale, it's sort of they recognize the value, so it's there for for a lifetime, hopefully.
Exactly. That's brilliant. So just bringing you in a bit, James, here in the sense of what people want from their work. We know that people want a good salary. That's still a key driver for everyone. We know they want flexibility and work-life balance, and we know that they want to have interesting projects to work on. Are you hearing much in terms of people talking, hey, like Ben said, I want a job that is impactful, that is affecting the world?
I'd be interested about that.
Yeah.
A lot of people, I think, especially in the last sort of like 4 to 5 months, it seems to be a shift of, if I'm going to move, I want to be in a role where I can really deliver something, I can be part of change, or I can actually bring value, or I can bring something to the table where I can, whether it's a 3-month or a 12-month or an 18-month period, kind of sit back and be like, I did something, and I've actually impacted, not just be a cog in the machine, so to speak. Maybe be someone who actually can be involved in building new machines.
And is that the kind of person, would they sit there and say, I would take a slightly lower salary, or a lower paying job, or a different job title for that? Is it got that far, or people not quite that point?
I think people would sidestep and maybe take a little bit of a cut. I wouldn't say it's to the point where people are ready to take like a big cut, but I think people, for the right sort of role, the right opportunities put in front of them, and it's going to offer the ability for them to actually make a change, and also, like, say, like the amount of growth that you can actually do in there is a long-term like sort of pipeline and you can actually see yourself there longer term, people are willing to kind of move sideways or maybe move down half a step and across to go up and get their journey going.
That's good to hear.
So I think it's slowly seeing that change, because I think as what COVID's taught us as well is that, you know, now we've got flexibility, like, salaries across the data space have gone up, although it's people are now like really focused on what they want to do and what they want to achieve, and like even in like the 5 or 10 year time, be like, what can I look at, what can I say I've done, what have I actually attributed to?
People seem to jump to healthcare. It's just the obvious. They go, oh, you know, healthcare would be great. I feel like that's going to make an impact. So I think it's going to take more businesses like yours, Ben, but more bigger businesses talking about other areas that you could make an impact for people to realize, because it is hard, because you hear like the data industry, salaries are going up. I want to be part of that. I want to make hay while the sun shines. But to then grab those people who go, you know what, it's not about that for me. It's about making a change, because I don't think in the years that I've been doing it, it's really been a big conversation, but it's definitely starting to happen, which is good to hear.
Well, I guess it also depends on, I mean, there's a number of factors, that also the company, where they're at. Like, so I'm generally speaking, you know, if you want to be, if like early days of Tesla or whatever, Facebook, whatever it is, you would sacrifice. Like, if you knew that, if you're on a rocket ship, you want to be part of that team. Like, it doesn't, for me, I just want to be part of that team because I know, yes, they'll be impactful hugely to the world. I think it's the same idea for, you know, do you believe in this mission of this company? And do you, even if you weren't getting, you know, because it's a startup, even if you're not getting the corporate salary that may be above it, you're probably getting equity, and you're probably actually, you've got bigger reward potentially down the road by, you know, in a risk return perspective. So it sort of depends on where you're at in your risk appetite as well, to be honest. So yes, there's impact, but then there's also, you know, if your early days of a rocket ship, you come in and you just come in and work and you go, what can I do? You don't go, oh, maybe 5 or 10K more, 140 or whatever it is. You know, that's sort of how I sort of also see it. Of course, you know, from our perspective, we want to be competitive with the best, you know, teams in the world. But there's only so much we can offer given where our stage. So it is definitely, you know, the team, the people who come and work with us, they do have a few, that they do have a different element of that. They have a few elements of all those areas where I want to be super impactful. I want to have autonomy around doing cool, awesome stuff, which you will too, because we're a small team-ish, not a big corporate part of a cog. But at the same time, you want to be part of a rocket ship. You want to be learning the skills and using the tools that tomorrow, in 1 month, we just flipped, you know, we don't like Prefect in our data stack. Well, let's flip it to something else. Like, you want to learn the latest, right? So there's all those elements. Yeah. Now that if you've got, you know, responsibilities, you know, and mortgages and, you know, and kids and stuff, there's definitely a balance there. You know, I think, because there's more of a risk, you know, but there's higher on the reward side, 100%. I think.
I guess the problem you've got in a sense is that in the data industry, most people's brains work to a risk adverse way of thinking because their whole life is spent analysing and seeing the worst and possibly the best that could happen. But yeah, I think the things working with you, Ben, that was great in terms of actually the sale of the company and the role. When talking about the impact that you're making, it's the easiest thing to sell to people, but it is right. You just straight away 50% of the market go, look, I'd love to do it, but I've just sent my second kid to a private school, or I've just got a new mortgage.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just what it is, right? It's the
100%. And I completely acknowledge that. Yeah, and that was, and you know, the candidate that you guys helped us with, we love him, and he's been a really great part of the team and super valuable. So you know, from our side, from my side, it's so different to the academic environment. That's such collaborative now. We've got a really core group that's really great. Of course, there's all these projects we want to get to that we can't do right now, but that's where as we grow, we'll be looking for some more of those of those types of candidates and people to be part of the journey.
Like a hybrid kind of person as well, right?
Yeah.
You can wear a few hats.
I think I was going to
exactly the skill set.
On the balancing act is that the past sort of 20 or so years, the climate has been a big focus. Like growing up, that was always a big thing we learned in school, in uni, and like always in life. So I'd say people who've been in the industry entering now in the last sort of 5-10 or so years, like you've grown up with it, so it becomes a factor of when you think about your role. And I think we're going to continue to see that over the next 5 and 10 years of people entering the market that have grown up being taught about climate change and what's going on. So it becomes a factor of when they think about the new role or what they want to do and how they're going to impact their career, what's actually going to be a choice for them. So I think we're seeing a shift in the market in that as well. People have grown up with it, so it's always kind of going to be in the back of your mind, be a factor that determines what you do and where you go.
Yep. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah, definitely. So not long left now, Ben. I thought a really good question to ask you. A couple more before we get to a couple of fun ones at the end. If you could get your hands on a specific company's data or a locked data set, what would it be and why? Like maybe what could really impact Emmi and
it'd be banks.
Right.
So right now we can get a lot out of most sectors, but we can't get deep into their loan books and who they're loaning money with. So that's a very private, that's a private space where we can't get into. So we have to work with banks to really one-to-one. But I'd love to get into, their data to really see how their exposures are, how they're looking in terms of their net zero loan books. Do you
think it will ever be something that you can get your hands on, or
it's definitely coming? But they can't be closed up for long, because there's regulations now that are requiring it. So ASIC and others are saying, look, you're going to have to start to companies disclose emissions, so your loan books will have to be disclosed too at some point. I can't see it not happening. It's going to probably take a while, but I think because that's sort of their advantage as well. But yeah, I think it's inevitable.
And what would be the advantage to the bank, for example, to open that up to you guys? Like, what would be the pitch to them in that sense?
Well, the pitch would be we can help you avoid losing a lot of money, but B, help drive you towards the opportunities and the problem, solving the problem.
Nice.
That would be it.
The only reason I ask is I know a guy, a good friend of mine, one of my best friends actually, he's director at one of the banks. So I might try and introduce you. He works in home loans, so I might be able to help at least start a conversation.
It's probably at the CEO level, I reckon.
Yeah,
I would say, because I've never done that before. But I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'll see what I can do. Okay, brilliant. So look, the last one that I think would be really useful for people out there to know about you is any books that you would direct people to that you've perhaps read over the years that would really get someone started thinking about maybe some of the stuff that you've been thinking about.
I reckon. Look, to be honest, I mean, there's a lot of different. There's a lot of different books that have inspired me, but I do think Factfulness is the one that's, I think, really awesome from a data perspective. Hans Rosling's Factfulness. I don't know if you know it, but I love that book. Just how the narrative, it's data driven, but it's all the narrative of how you present it. And it's all around all sorts of different indicators around human well-being. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, well, we'll put that out there. So now the most important question on all of the podcasts, and I'm guessing you might have thought about this, is which 3 people would you want with you in a zombie apocalypse? Now, maybe we could go for a climate apocalypse that's really applicable to you. The caveat to this question is that your family is safe and they're in a bunker, so you do not need to bring them along. There's been a couple of common themes throughout, but I'm interested to see who you would want in that moment in time.
Well, in a zombie apocalypse, there's no sort of. I assume we're just living. There's no data availability, and there's no.
Correct.
So what I want to. I would want. I guess it's the same thing as about. Yeah, who's the dinner party guests? I guess similar sort of.
Very similar. Yeah. But they're going to try and help you scavenge and all the rest of it as well. Don't forget,
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, so I guess a young David Attenborough.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Yeah.
From a, I guess I don't know, I'm very heavy into sports. So can I bring them back from the dead or?
Oh yeah, whoever, fictional, non-fictional, dead, alive, whoever you want.
Oh, I'd say Don Bradman.
Do you know what?
Because I just want to learn. The data is so anomalous. He's 100 average. It's just off the charts. Like, how do you do that? Yeah.
Anyway. Look, as an Englishman, 99.9 average, just so you know, not 100. But also, if you watch Shaun of the Dead, cricket bat is one of the most lethal zombie killing weapons.
Yeah,
so that's pretty good. So he'd work. So you got David Attenborough, Don Bradman, and who's your third?
Well, and the last guy is someone you guys probably don't know. His name's Perry Cross, and he is. So he's actually. I think of all the people in the world that have the mental resilience to go through a zombie apocalypse, it's him, because he was a quadriplegic in a rugby accident 25 years ago. So he can't breathe, but usually the life expectancy of a quadriplegic is like 3 years. So Christopher Reeve, I don't know if you remember, he's passed a long time. He was a friend of his. So Perry's 25 years young and still just powering through it, and his mental strength is insane. So if I was in a zombie apocalypse, I'd want him to bottle some of that mental resilience.
Yeah, that's a great answer. He'd help lift everybody up in that situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, brilliant. Good answer. Well, look, you've said it all almost. The last question we've got for you is, speaking of young data scientists, young data engineers, what advice have you got for them in terms of making an impact? Like, if you were to give them a tagline or a bit of advice, what would you give them?
I would say be strong on the narrative around trying to present. Know your audience is what I try and say. So you're not talking when you're presenting something or trying to come up with new ideas or new analytics or whatever it is. Just know who your audience is and how that can be impactful and how I can share it in the right way. So I think the data is not, it's not going to present itself by itself. Like you have to be the narrator. So you have to be the David Attenborough to try and present your case. So that's what I'd say. Don't just focus on the data and what you know, focus on the audience and what they need to know.
Brilliant. Great advice. So thanks for coming on, Ben. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, I'm told I have to keep these to an hour. I could have spoken to you for about 3, I think. Really
no worries.
interesting stuff that you've been doing.
Happy to, it's great that, I always see, your videos via LinkedIn feeds. I don't have much time, but I think it's really great what you're doing. And, it's good to see, the data community is growing and growing in Australia, and, that we've got some really amazing people here. And it's great to see that actually what you're doing is getting out there and creating that sense, that community. It's great.
I appreciate that. And anything else from you, James, before we clock off for the day?
No, I'd say just like Ben said, just be strong, know your audience, and keep pushing through.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much again, guys. Really enjoyed that. And we'll see you guys all next week on the next week's show.